Do you guys want to make an email chain?
We can just put it in the chat.
Yeah, our case is going to be a little fast, so we might just put a case doc in, or we can put it in the chat. That's fine.
You're spreading?
No, we're not spreading.
No. It's just like, internet troubles, long case. Not long case, but like 700 words.
Okay, never mind. We're not going to run a long case, I don't think.
Okay.
Hey guys.
Okay.
You're still waiting for Shadipto?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have the idea how we can get a hold of Shadipto?
Can everybody else in the room text Shadipto?
Yes, can everyone else in the room text Shadipto? I put you all in there because I figured that, it would be fun and that students are more responsible than adults, so.
I'll text Shadipto right now.
You're the best. You all have a wonderful day.
Hey guys, just go ahead and start with 2 judges. If it's a split decision, you guys will both go first, and then yell at Shadipta later.
Sounds good.
Okay, then I guess we can get started.
Yeah, give me 1 second. Okay. I think that should be good.
Okay. Before we start this finals round, it would be unjust to proceed without thanking some people that made this possible. First, I would like to thank the NA PF gang. They've always supported us. They've always taught us well. Next, I want to thank my opponent and duo partner, Satvik Polagani. We've had some good times, done some good scripts. Next, I'd like to thank Krishna for doing all the Krishna things that he does, whether they be good or bad. Arjun for being our mentor and our dad here in PF. And lastly, I want to thank my partner, Milan, for being the shortest partner that I could find. So with that being said, is everyone ready to begin? Okay, then my time will start now. Milan and I affirm the National Security Agency, or NSA, should end its surveillance of U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents. Contention 1 is misused data. Lyon of the University of Kingston 14 explains that the NSA engages in mass surveillance on U.S. citizens through a process called big data, where they search, analyze, and cross-reference large data sets. Balco of the Washington Post explains that both federal law enforcement, such as the FBI, and even local police, have access to large troves of personal data that are collected by the NSA. In fact, in a single year, law enforcement ran around 31 million searches related to US people based on data collected by the NSA. Thus, Aronson of the Intercept 19 concludes that law enforcement only has access to large amounts of data because accessing NSA databases does not require a warrant. Unfortunately, this aids dangerous practices, as Brain of the ASA 17 explains that the adoption of big data analytics by law enforcement has led to a lower threshold for inclusion in law enforcement databases, as individuals who have never even had direct police contact can be arrested. Because of this, Borchetta of the Boston Law Review in 2016 writes that big data allows for more surveillance, which only increases suspicion amongst law enforcement, leading to a lack of probable cause when arrests are made. For these reasons, O'Neill of Harvard finds that big data has directly led to mass incarceration. Thus, German of the Brennan Center for Justice in 2014 concludes that NSA surveillance has played a direct role in law enforcement using these practices, causing mass incarceration. Though some of these citizens did not commit these crimes, the University of Pennsylvania 07 finds that even a record of arrest destroys employment opportunities by giving employers a perception of criminal activities, which spills over to non-employment contexts like housing access. As a result, Defina of Villanova University 13 concludes that if mass arrests did not occur, poverty would be 20% lower, lifting 9.1 million people out of poverty. Contention 2 is global stability. Ending domestic surveillance collapses the NSA's global security operations, as Bell of the TCF 17 writes that in the process of conducting foreign surveillance, the NSA collects data on Americans as well. Thus, the only way to end all surveillance of Americans, as the resolution asks, is to end foreign surveillance as well. This would be crucial to ending drone strikes, as Eversley of USA Today 13 writes that US drone campaigns rely heavily on NSA surveillance. For example, the NSA analyzes the metadata of 55 million phone users in Pakistan to identify potential terrorists. Byford of The Verge in 2014 furthers that NSA surveillance allows for US military drone strikes without confirmation of targets on the ground. A lack of confirmation kills, which is why Taylor of MIC in 2012 quantifies that for every target that a drone strike kills, it also kills 50 civilians. Unfortunately, these civilian casualties devastate countries in two key ways, and the first is through terrorism. A boss of the Atlantic 13 explains that US drone strikes increase anti-American sentiment, which spurs terrorism as civilian casualties are often exposed. For these reasons, the Institute of Labor Economics 19 concludes one drone strike causes 4 terrorist attacks per day in the following week. However, Walt of Foreign Policy 14 states that without NSA surveillance, the US would rely more heavily on tried and true counterterrorism efforts, such as infiltrating terrorist organizations and flipping their members. Fighting terrorism is key, as the Department of Defense 14 finds that modern-day terrorists have much greater lethality, giving them the ability to kill millions. The second is by causing civil wars. Boyle of International Affairs 13 finds that drone attacks weaken and undermine the incumbent regime's credibility of protecting their citizens. This emboldens domestic rivals to take over through violence, spurring civil wars. Past precedence proves, as the Strategic Studies Institute 13 finds, that drone strikes that killed civilians led to an increase in insurgency in Vietnam. The International Growth Center 16 finds that a civil war could kill up to 3 million and force 600,000 to abandon their country. For the previous reasons, we strongly urge you to affirm.
Okay. If everybody's ready, I can begin my case. Okay, I'll start time now. Satvik and I negate the National Security Agency should end its surveillance of U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents, otherwise known as domestic surveillance. Contention 1 is preventing pandemics. Held of Civil Eat 20 writes, factory farms serve as a unique breeding ground of novel flu viruses. The mass confinement of animals uniquely exacerbates this issue, making the next pandemic a matter of when, not if. Fortunately, NSA surveillance stops the next pandemic. As Maitenka of Medical Daily 14 explains, mass surveillance provides the best early warning system against pandemics. Rosenstein of Lawfare 20 warrants, mass surveillance algorithms process social media posts, GPS-enabled smartphones, and databases of phones and emails to reduce the early spread of a pandemic. Past precedent proves, as Maitenka furthers, the original SARS outbreak was detected by NSA programs nearly 2 months before any World Health Organization publication. Fortunately, as Rosenstein furthers, the COVID-19 pandemic is ushering in an expansion of surveillance for the purpose of countering pandemics. Affirming would destroy this and prevent our chances of preventing pandemics. The impact of this is deadly. Kirk of AEON 13 explains, pandemics are the deadliest dangers that mankind faces. Fortunately, mass surveillance allows medicines and doctors to be sent to the right places. This method is far more effective than quarantines and other large-scale measures. Thus, Kirk concludes, mass surveillance can help avoid pandemics by quickly isolating and eliminating them. Preventing the next pandemic is crucial, as Mandal of Medical News 20 quantifies, the next pandemic would be 100 times worse than COVID, killing millions. Contention 2 is corporate collapse. Grawl of Foreign Policy 16 reports, the NSA collects data from big tech companies, which makes their surveillance possible. Matthews of Brookings Institute 19 finds partner companies include Microsoft, Google, Yahoo, Facebook, YouTube, Skype, Apple, and Amazon, among others. Bigo of Routledge Studies 19 quantifies, the NSA has collected 350% more data from partner companies over a 4-year period. This has led to a unique relationship between the NSA and partner companies. As Bigo furthers, big tech companies partner with the NSA since the NSA prevents antitrust regulations and lawsuits from being placed upon them. Antitrust is when larger corporations are broken down into smaller ones, decreasing the value and profits of those companies. Sanjay of the Medium 20 explains, the NSA essentially creates a force field protecting partners companies from antitrust regulations in exchange for their partnership in surveillance. Past precedent proves, as Sanjay furthers, in 2000, the Supreme Court's decision to break up Microsoft was reversed because it offered data that the NSA could use. However, affirming the resolution ends the need for this partnership. Sanjay concludes, ending domestic surveillance would trigger antitrust regulations against these big companies, as the NSA would no longer be able to protect them. Problematically, Goldman Sachs in 2019 empirically finds antitrust enforcement decreases the value of companies dramatically, causing investors to reduce investment. This is disastrous. As Kane of Forbes 18 warrants, investment into big tech companies is what prevents the industry from collapse. Thus, Goldman Sachs concludes, increasing antitrust lawsuits will cause the tech industry to collapse. The impact is a global recession. Millard of the University of North Carolina 18 explains, big tech companies have played a massive role in creating economic growth in the United States. If the tech industry collapsed, the US economy would crash as well. Unfortunately, Francis of the Federal Reserve Bank in St. Louis 15 elaborates, a US crash would lead to a global recession due to our economy's global interconnectedness. The consequences are extreme, as Tufts University quantifies, when the last US recession went global, 100 million people were pushed into poverty. For these reasons, we urge you to negate.
Could I call for I think it's the evidence that says like they reversed the Microsoft decision.
Sure. It's in the chat.
Okay, I'll just read it to cross.
Okay, Doctor, are you good for cross?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, I believe I have the first question.
Yep.
So what is happening to factory farms right now?
I'm sorry, could you elaborate? I'm not sure what you're asking.
Right. So basically what we're trying to tell you is, right, factory farms are decreasing right now. And that's like because of increased government regulation in which they're cracking down on sanitation standards and also abolishing the farms altogether.
Okay, but would you agree with me that another pandemic is entirely possible and likely?
I mean, sure. Well, I mean, anything's possible, right? But we'd say that the probability of a pandemic like occurring is significantly decreased now that things like factory farms are increasingly regulated. Therefore, they're not as prone to creating things like, I believe you like cite novel flu viruses in your case.
Yeah, okay. So even apart from factory farms, there'd be a lot of other sources to cause a pandemic, right?
Like what?
Like for example, wet food markets in foreign countries, or various wildlife potentially spreading novel viruses and etc. Right?
Okay, that's fine. You can have a question.
Okay, sure. So on your first contention about the law enforcement having large like this evidence, all the surveillance in order to arrest people without warrants. So would you agree with me that like arrests would still okay, so let me rephrase this. Even without the NSA having these large troves of data, you'd still see these law enforcement agencies arresting people without probable cause?
That's not necessarily true, because what we specifically tell you is the reason that unjust arrests happen in large numbers right now is because the NSA is the only government agency collecting mass amounts of user data. And what they do is they put this data into an algorithm and it points police officers to places where the algorithm believes there will be crime. In those areas, like the officers arrest people without probable cause, as we tell you in our case. The reason that other agencies can't do it is because, for example, the FBI, the CIA, they're not authorized to do this kind of mass bulk surveillance. They use very targeted things and very targeted operations like we've seen in the past. But could I have a question?
Sure.
So how exactly is the NSA protecting companies from antitrust lawsuits or enforcement?
Yeah, so what the Sanjay 20 card provides is that the NSA creates a litigatory bubble around these corporations so that
right. I'm asking what that entails though, right? Like you can like say like the rhetoric of it's a litigatory bubble, right? But what does that mean? Like how exactly does the
so that
NSA
means that the organizations such as the FTC and courts themselves are not implementing antitrust in order to break apart these companies because of the benefit that they provide to the NSA. That's what that means.
But the FTC and the NSA aren't affiliated, right?
Well, okay, so they're both part of the U.S. government, and we tell you specifically with Sanjay that FTC enforcement isn't being triggered because of the benefits these companies provide to the NSA and their efforts in surveillance and crime prevention. And that's the end of cross.
Prep starting when the call goes through. Okay, starting now.
Just pause prep really quickly. Can I see the 350% increase in data shared?
Sure. It's in the chat.
Okay, we'll resume prep now. Stop prep. It's just gonna be down their case and some wing at the end. Is everybody good? Let's go to their first contention about pandemics. Their whole uniqueness is that factory farms are going to create a lot of these pandemics. Factory farms have existed for decades. They don't provide a unique time frame for when this next pandemic occurs. But second of all, the Business Insider 2018 explains that there's actually a decrease in factory farms right now because they're adopting things such as more like sanitation standards and things like that. That's why we would argue this next pandemic is never going to emerge. But second of all, their argument is only specific to the United States. We've never seen a US pandemic be like 100 times worse than COVID. It's only like global pandemics because their argument is stopping a pandemic in the US. That means they need to prove that the next pandemic is going to get 100 times worse. There's literally no warrant in case for this. Their Rosenstein evidence that says because of COVID, surveillance will increase is super bad. It's not even about the NSA. It just talks about government surveillance in general. But with the Center of Public Integrity, and this past September said the CDC and HHS are working on a new surveillance program. In fact, it's been the largest surveillance initiative program in the past decades. They're investing millions of dollars into it. The problem with this is it takes out their entire case because it's not the NSA who's increasing the surveillance, it's other health organizations specifically that are made to counter pandemics in the first place. Finally, what Gerstle of CISS in 2020 finds that the NSA and other spy agencies don't even want to do public health surveillance in the first place. The warrant for this is they're made for things such as like countering terrorism and crime, not to like stop pandemics. Their argument doesn't make any sense. But finally, we would say you can turn it on them because Brookings finds the reason why COVID got worse was because of all the political divides. People didn't want to make masks or like wear masks or quarantine or socially distant. We would argue that gets a lot worse in their world because when people feel like the government is intruding on their basic rights because of things such as surveillance, they're going to disobey them even more. Let's go into their second contention about a corporate collapse. So many problems here. They say further evidence that there's been a 350% increase in data shared with the NSA. One, this is from 2017. What Harvard finds is major news outlets have incorrectly reported that Google and Facebook gave direct access from the government to user data. This is incorrect, as Harvard finds there was no evidence of doing so whatsoever. You're automatically preferring this because that post states all of their evidence. This means there's no cooperation with these companies and with these big tech companies in the NSA in the first place. That takes out their entire link. But second of all, what the Harvard Law Review in 2018 says, major technologies have been taking a stand against government overreach and surveillance because they care about their user privacies. These companies such as Apple, Microsoft, and Facebook have taken active measures in blocking search warrant and subpoenas from the government to prevent an overreach in surveillance. Therefore, the Harvard evidence concludes this demonstrates a clear push by technology companies to maintain user privacy. You're also referring these two pieces of evidence because it post-states all of theirs. This means there's no cooperation occurring whatsoever, taking out their entire link into these antitrust regulations. Let's get on to the specific argument of antitrust. One, they don't give you any contextualization of what a ligatory force field means by the NSA. Sure, the NSA could be protecting them, but they don't entail what that exactly means. Their argument is super bad because their evidence says, and their argument says, Antitrust lawsuits trigger their impact. Literally in the past year, we've seen major antitrust lawsuits for companies such as Google and Facebook in the FTC. That's really important because one, their impact should have already triggered, but B, it disproves their entire argument because the lawsuits are already happening right now. That's really important because their evidence that says a Microsoft that lawsuit that was reversed in 2000 is never specific to the NSA. We would argue their impact should have already triggered. But finally, on their impact, it's really like they don't give you any contextualization of when a bubble pops. We would argue our case is a lot more clear because we have 100% probability because these problems are occurring in the status quo, while theirs is completely hypothetical. Their whole argument has already been disproved because we were already seeing antitrust lawsuits and we're already seeing an increase in surveillance that's not done by the NSA.
We're gonna take some prep. Starting, let me just pull up a timer. Starting now. Stop prep. That was 1:17.
Okay.
Yeah, so like Khalitha, I have a few thank yous as well. First, to Khalitha and Millen for prepping with me, and even though they have all these cards, I don't know why they're calling for them. So thank you for prepping with me. Second, for Arjun for carrying me in November and December and getting us our state quals. So thank you for that. And third, to the rest of the PF gang, as much as you argue with me and try to prove me wrong, it's really been a great ride, and I couldn't have done it without you guys. So if everybody's ready, it'll be frontlining and then their case, maybe weighing if I get to it. Is everybody good? Then we will start time. We'll concede to all the defense on our first contention, but regarding the term that they say that that surveillance means people don't trust the government, we would say that surveillance is existing right now, but people are still following preventative measures such as social distancing and making masks. This term literally doesn't make sense since we're literally in a pandemic right now, but people are still following measures even though we have surveillance. This term doesn't make any sense. Drop it. Let's go off to our second contention. They tried to tell you about these two Harvard pieces of evidence. This evidence is really, really bad because in the evidence itself, it says that these companies, including our partner companies that we talk about, lobbied against Congress to remove their user privacy rights. This means they're literally taking steps against user privacy. It's literally happening right now. The evidence is really bad. I urge you to call for it. But then they try to tell you that we have no contextualization on the evidence. Our Sanjay evidence is really good with this because it specifically says that it provides a force field. This does two things. Either A, it prevents antitrust lawsuits from being successful in the first place, or B, it prevents them from being passed in the first place. It's really clear. Call for the Sanjay evidence. It's really good. But then they try to tell you that lawsuits have already happened, so our impact should have triggered. They severely misconstrue the argument. We're telling you that when lawsuits against all of these big tech companies happens, that's what causes the economy to crash. Sure, even if they non-unique one or two of our examples, we have 5 other big tech companies who are perfectly safe. When all of these collapse, when you affirm the resolution, that's what causes the recession. Then they, yeah. So let's go into their case. On their first contention, we would say at the top, it's entirely non-unique because police are already adapting predictive policing measures. For example, in Detroit, the police literally have facial recognition systems that are better than those of the NSA. They're always going to be able to make mass arrests. But then second, we would say you turn this entire argument against them because without the NSA, the DEA specifically is going to make a lot more arrests. The DEA right now uses NSA technology in order to carry out targeted arrests. But when you remove that, what the Department of Justice explains is that what Davis of the New York Post explains is that the DEA is going to enforce crackdowns and it's just going to largely make random arrests because it doesn't know who to target. That's why you're going to turn this argument against them. That's why you're going to be seeing mass incarceration only increases in their world. But then finally on the impact, we would say the entire thing is non-unique because what the Fair Fight Initiative finds is that mass incarceration is always going to happen for two reasons. First is because these people can't afford bails, and second is because of problematic probation and parole. Their impact is always going to happen. You're never going to be seeing poverty decrease by 20%. These 9.1 million people are never going to come out of poverty. But then let's go on to their second contention on global stability. A lot of problems here. First, their own evidence contradicts their first link because their Eversley evidence says that the drones were really crucial in stopping Al-Qaeda. This directly takes out their own first link where they talk about drones actually increasing terrorism. It simply doesn't make sense. But then second, they try to tell you that there's no confirmation if the NSA exists. This is inherently not true. What the NSA does is that it allows for confirmation, but we don't have to have our troops on the ground. The NSA uses its surveillance to track where these terrorists are at any given point of time, and that's the confirmation. We don't need these troops on the ground, so that's why the NSA does it. But then we would say there are two turns on their first link. First is what Berlin in 2016 finds is that whenever a drone strike happens, it decreases the probability of another terrorist attack by 24%. This is because drone strikes often take out their leaders, which means these terrorist groups don't know what to do, and they don't know what to do, and they're just left abandonless, and they can be easily picked off. But the second turn is that the alternative is even worse because their own Walt evidence concedes that whenever you get rid of surveillance, you're going to be increasing tried and true surveillance measures such as infiltrating organizations. Boots on the ground has been historically a really, really bad way and has been a very good driver of anti-American sentiment. This directly leads to their own link, and it's a better link in because boots on the ground increases terrorist attacks far more than drones ever will. Even if you don't like drones, the alternative is so much worse. But on their contention too on civil wars, cross-apply everything I said about Walt here. When we increase boots on the ground, terrorism is going to increase. Terrorism is a better link into civil wars because out of the terrorist groups so far, 65 terrorist organizations have escalated to civil wars. For example, look to those in Yemen and Syria. Those have been started or fueled by terrorism. So you're only increasing it and you're making it worse in their world. At the end of the day, negating is the only way to go.
Can I also call for some evidence? So on C1, the predictive policing measures evidence,
Yeah, sure.
and then that they're going to do mass crackdowns on the turn.
Okay. The crackdowns was an analytic, but do you want the precedent for that?
No, it's fine.
There's both links. The first one talks about how these police companies do the same stuff as the NSA, and the second one's talking about the facial recognition that I mentioned.
Okay. Are you good for cross?
Yeah. You can take the first question.
Question. So aren't Facebook and Google the two biggest tech companies that exist?
Yeah. Sure.
So if there's lawsuits happening against them right now, why isn't investment decreasing from the biggest tech companies causing a recession?
Right. There's two problems with that. First is that these lawsuits are happening, sure, but they're not being successful. That's really key because antitrust lawsuits can proceed as much as they want, but if they're not successful, it doesn't lead to any.
For Goldman Sachs evidence, it says that lawsuits are what's leading to this decrease in investment. Doesn't that just
I'm getting to that part. We're seeing they are facing decreased investment, but the reason it doesn't trigger our impact is because our evidence is talking about when all of these big tech companies face.
If the NSA was so good in providing this, and the fact that there's lawsuits on the biggest tech companies, doesn't that disprove your link and show that it's actually possible to put these lawsuits on them?
I never said that the NSA is going to completely stop lawsuits from being passed.
Okay,
I just said that the NSA is going to stop them from being
There's
successful.
a threat of
That's
future
why-
lawsuits from the status quo right now.
What?
Isn't there always going to be a threat of lawsuits in the future? If the NSA couldn't do it for the two biggest
The
companies,
threat of lawsuits is irrelevant. The threat of them being successful is what matters here.
that's all your
What you've
evidence
seen
says.
over-
Your evidence says the investment decreases if the lawsuit happens, not if they're successful or not.
Wait, that's not what it says, but that's not okay. So basically, what we're happening is even if, sure, let's say that these investment went down for one or two of them, our entire impact triggers when all of these companies face lawsuits.
Okay.
It's not just one. But can I
That's
have a
fine.
question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Right. So if these if these local police agencies are already adopting their own measures, is the NSA actually doing anything?
Okay, so what measures are these?
Like, for example, facial recognition, which is far better than phone
Okay,
metadata.
and we
and
tell you they can only do that because they're getting data from the NSA. Because
Wait, that's not true. Facial recognition
our
is
argument isn't
completely
predictive.
independent of NSA.
That's not our argument. Our argument is talking about big data, getting all this warrantless data from the NSA, which leads to things such as a lot less probable cause and a lot more
Right, but that's not responsive to what I asked, because I'm saying that these police agencies are adopting these measures that the NSA is doing itself. Insofar as that
We're
is,
not talking, our argument isn't predictive policing though.
I know your argument isn't, but I'm saying your argument. Okay, you can have a question.
Okay. Let's go to drones. So on your evidence that says there's a 24% decrease in terrorism. So
Yeah.
talking about or actually wait, never mind. So on the tried and true counterterrorism methods, so
Yeah.
doesn't the evidence conclude that these are actually good methods because they're tried and true?
Right, but the problem with these tried and true measures, it doesn't matter what the evidence concludes, because people can write whatever they want to write. Look to what's actually happened when we deployed boots on the ground. Wait, can I finish? Dylan, can I finish? We're almost out of cross.
Yeah,
You
go
asked
ahead.
the question, let me finish.
Yeah, go
All right.
ahead.
So basically, what you've seen is that whenever we've actually deployed these boots on the ground, terrorism has increased because these people historically hate the fact that our military can just be there and boss people around. And that's cross.
Okay, that's fine. We're gonna take some prep. Okay, stop prep.
Okay, the order is just going to be our case and their case, weighing at the end. Is everyone ready? Hold on, my time is back. Okay. Then time will start now. Let's start off on our case. First, on our first contention about misuse data. They read this term about DEA crackdowns. However, realize that these crackdowns are non-unique. They happen in either world because they receive data from other areas of the government, not necessarily the NSA. The crackdowns they talk about are pretty non-unique. Next, let's go. We're going for our second contention, which talks about global stability. They make a couple of responses. First, they talk about like how Al-Qaeda and how like the NSA uses surveillance to like confirm targets by tracking their locations. However, this isn't true. NSA data is used to like in algorithms and used to speculate where terrorists might be or like where they might be or who they are with. That's why we find that there's lots of civilians in the crossfire. Taylor of MIT finds that each drone strike actually kills 50 civilians. That's because this speculation of the NSA isn't that accurate at like targeting terrorists in the first place. Even if that's not true, we tell you that like the drone strike has like a wide radius catching civilians in the crossfire. They give like a couple of terms specifically on our terrorism impact. We're going to tell you that our second impact about civil wars severely outweighs. And the only response that they give to that is that our Walt evidence talks about boots on the ground efforts. However, realize that what the evidence actually says is that those efforts are things like infiltrate
tech industry faces these lawsuits. That's when you see the collapse. That's why you see uniqueness on our side. But okay, then they have a couple other responses. They say that companies are trying to protect privacy rights, but the fact is that their own Harvard card says they're actively fighting privacy regulation and privacy laws from Congress. That's what their own card says. And we're talking about the companies that specifically give to the NSA, which is all of the companies. That's why you prefer our evidence. And then secondly, they say that they're not cooperating, but our evidence is literally from 2020, where you know these companies are providing cooperation and providing data. And then you prefer our Sanjay evidence on recency is literally from 2020. But then let's go into their case. Firstly, on mass incarceration, they say the DEA crackdown is non-unique because it'll always happen. But you haven't seen a massive DEA crackdown in the status quo. That only happens when the NSA is gone. That's when the DEA no longer has the targeted information, so they have to arrest a lot of people. So they see a mass DEA crackdown, which increases mass incarceration. But on their second contention, specifically on drones, firstly, on their Eversley evidence, on the NSA surveillance helping with these drone strikes, it literally says that the drone strikes were key to taking out Al-Qaeda. So they either drop their Eversley evidence that links into the NSA helping, or they drop the link. But then, extend the Berlin term tells you that you've seen a 24% decrease in terror attacks once a drone strike happens. That's take out the leaders. They never respond to the warranting. When you take out the leaders, these terrorist groups have no idea what they need to do and are disorganized. That leads to less terrorist attacks, not more. Lastly, on Walt, they try telling you that you're going to see tried and true measures instead of drone strikes, such as infiltrating organizations. That literally means boots on the ground. We saw what's happened in the past. We've had boots on the ground in Afghanistan and Iraq. You saw those places turn into forever wars where the United States still hasn't been able to leave. You saw an increase in terror, the rise of ISIS. That's really bad. You do not want to see that. And that's what is going to happen when you do not have these drone strikes. Lastly, on weighing, you're going to outweigh on probability. You know that when the NSA goes away, these big tech industry faces massive lawsuits, and that's when you actually see 100 million people go into poverty because of the economic collapse. But on their side, you have no idea whether it'll actually decrease terrorist attacks or increase it, because their own Eversley evidence literally says that drone strikes are key to taking out terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda. That's why you're going to be voting for the negation.
Okay, is everyone ready for Grant?
Yeah, you can have first question.
Okay, so does your Goldman Sachs evidence specifically say that all companies must have lawsuits on them for the recession to occur?
Right, the Goldman Sachs evidence says that whenever these investment decreases, that's going to cause like the tech industry to collapse. But what's really key here,
right? I'm asking what evidence specifically says that all tech companies must have lawsuits at the same time for the recession to occur.
No, okay. So what Sosvik is getting at is that in order for there to be that investment decrease, all these companies have to face the lawsuit in order for that to happen.
Okay, so how much investment decrease is that?
Right. The amount of investment decrease isn't important here. The fact of the matter is, when every single tech company in the U.S. sees a decrease in
The problem
investment,
is your evidence
that
isn't
triggers
big.
the impact.
Every tech company like having this antitrust regulation leads to the bubble to pop.
And also, Docs just said that investment amount is pretty important because he said you need to reach a certain investment amount. That
No,
can
no, no.
only
That's I never
happen
said you have
if
to
all
reach a certain
companies are
amount. I
having
said
losses.
all of okay. What I said. Okay, let me reiterate what I said. When all of these companies face those investment decreases, that's when you have enough in order for the impact that Goldman Sachs
Right,
talks
but
about
how
to
much
trigger.
is that? How much is that? Like, that's exactly what I'm saying. How much decrease is that you
Enough
need?
to trigger a recession.
Well, that's pretty,
Goldman
like,
Sachs specifically provides a breakdown that it'll be enough to cause the collapse of the industry, which triggers the recession.
And I have a question.
sure.
So let's talk about, have we seen a DEA crackdown in the entire time that the NSA has
That's
existed?
not our argument. Our argument is
We have,
CIA
like,
also gives the DEA surveillance. So even if you get rid of the NSA, you're still going to have.
That's not what I'm talking about. I know you're trying to say it's
yeah,
not the
you've
same.
seen a
but,
lot of
like,
DEA
just answer my
crackdowns in
question.
the past several years. Like, for
By the
example,
DEA?
yeah, the DEA. For example, the opioid crisis, like prescription drugs. There's a bunch of other things as well.
Right, but those were crackdowns on like doctors, not crackdowns on neighborhoods that we were talking about.
Well, I can give you an example of another one in Florida.
Like that.
All right, well, you can have a question. You can have a question.
Okay, I will take a question. Okay, so if like big tech companies, right? They depend on getting profit from selling like devices, services to consumers.
Yeah.
Then, if NSA privacy threatens the value of their products, then wouldn't you say they have like a pretty bad relationship with the NSA?
No. Okay, so So the fact is that a lot of these big tech companies literally rely on being able to sell data in order to make money. That's how they make their money, through targeted advertisement, right? So that's why we tell you they're fighting these like privacy regulations. They don't care about privacy. They literally make their money off of violating people's privacy.
Yeah, that's also why your own Harvard evidence concludes that there's no one way to categorize whether all big companies are either for the government or against the government. It says that there are groups for it and there are groups against it. Our evidence and your own Harvard law evidence indicates that the partner tech companies such as Google that we're talking about are for the government collection, and that's time.
Okay, it doesn't say that. It says like, okay, whatever. That's time.
Yeah, I can show you the part, but that's time.
Okay. Can I call for the evidence that all like tech companies have lawsuits
anyway? It's fine. We're out of prep anyway.
Yeah. Trust me, no.
Their case, our case. Wayne, is everybody good? Okay. Let's go to their case on big tech. The Harvard evidence is super good. It says a lot of news outlets have incorrectly reported that the big tech companies give data to the NSA. That means that even though there's not cooperation right now, taking out their entire link because they have to prove that cooperation is occurring in the status quo. It's a really explicit just call for the evidence. Then their whole link is that antitrust regulations happen, which is going to be super bad. But antitrust regulations are happening in the status quo. For example, Facebook and Google already have lawsuits on them. Their own Goldman Sachs evidence says the reason why investment decreases is because of the lawsuits themselves, meaning that their whole impact scenario should have already happened right now. They have no evidence that says that every single company has to have antitrust in order for a recession to occur. But second of all, they don't even warrant out why a recession would occur. It's a super bad argument to vote off of. On our case, they talk a lot about the DIA. The CIA still gives the DEA surveillance, meaning that the DEA won't do these mass crackdowns. On drones, the link is that when you collapse NSA surveillance, you collapse foreign surveillance. The Eversley evidence says the U.S. drone campaign relies heavily on the NSA data because it monitors it. That's really bad because the MIC evidence has conceded that each drone kills 50 civilians. The whole impact about civil wars is completely conceded because Boyle finds drones weaken the current regime because it decreases the credibility of a regime in being able to protect their civilians. That's why you see an increase in insurgency. For example, in countries like Vietnam, drone strikes actually led to an increase in insurgency and an increase in civil war, which shows 3 million people. All their Lincolns and all their responses about civil wars are dropped in summary. Don't let them bring it up in final focus. They talk a lot about terrorism. Their terminal impact is a 24% decrease in terrorism, we would always argue 3 million people dying to a civil war outweighs any sort of potential terrorism impact they have, because one, they don't read any, but two, they don't even prove to you how much terrorism increases in their world. At the end of the day, you're voting for us off a past president because we tell you drones that directly led to an increase in civil war, and 3 million people is always greater than their case that doesn't even happen in the first place.
My final focus is just going to be big tech drones weighing. Is everybody ready? All right, then time starts. Let's start on big tech companies. The entire argument is that these big tech companies are willingly partnering with the NSA, and that's what's preventing them from getting antitrust lawsuits, which is preventing a recession. They always extend this Harvard evidence that says, oh, they aren't willingly giving it. But remember, the Harvard evidence literally says in its own conclusion that you can't classify which groups are for, that it doesn't know which ones are for the government and anti the government. And their Harvard evidence also says that the groups that we talk about, the partner groups such as Microsoft and Google, they're literally giving it to the NSA and they're lobbying in Congress to remove their user privacy rights. It's literally flows over to our side. Then they try to tell you that lawsuits are already happening, so our impact should have triggered. Remember, even if they non-unique just one or two of our examples, our entire argument is that all 7 of these big tech companies are going to face massive antitrust lawsuits. That's what's going to trigger our impact. That's what's going to trigger the recession, pushing 100 million people into poverty. That goes clean conceded because they only nitpick these 2 examples, but they don't talk about the bigger picture, which is our entire argument. On their second contention on global stability. They drop 2 massive turn tiers that end the round for them. First is the Berlin 16 turn, where we tell you that one drone strike decreases the probability of another terrorist attack by 24%. First, the only response to this came in final focus, which is way too late in the round. But second, we would say they don't actually interact with the warranting. We tell you that these drone strikes eliminate the leaders, which is what leaves them clueless. They only try to tell you that they outweigh, but they don't outweigh because drone strikes directly increase civil wars. That's the warranting that Dox extends in final focus, because their Walt evidence finds that whenever you increase boots in the ground by ending surveillance, you're going to be increasing terrorism. Remember that these terrorist groups are the groups that are literally escalating conflict into civil wars. These terrorist groups are going to trigger their impact. In fact, it's a better link-in than their case. At the end of the day, you can vote for us on 2 reasons. First is on scope, because you know for a fact that whenever you affirm the resolution, you're going to be seeing 100 million people pushed into poverty. But second is on probability, because you don't know any of their impacts will happen. Because in fact, affirming makes these issues worse. That's why you're always going to negate. Good round, guys.
Good round.
Yeah, good round.
Can I take a look at the Harvard evidence?
Yes, I will send it over.
Do you want to send the part we're talking about as well?
Sure. And is the Goldman evidence in the chat?
I'll send it.
Okay, thank you.
I just sent the Goldman evidence, and I'll let you know which one the Harvard is. And the paragraph I sent right now is what you can control F from the Harvard evidence.
Sounds good.
Wait, can we go or are you gonna disclose?
Also, can I have evidence on literally just the line saying that the NSA or big tech is giving over the data? I don't need like the whole card. I just want one line or a few lines.
I just sent it in the chat. I can send you the links to the website too if you need it. I'll just send it.
Yeah, and that's the other Matthews evidence that the bottom part comes from.
And there's the link.
Hey, is this round over? Okay. So, Joy Akshana, are you filling out your ballots now? You're not giving an oral critique and making everyone very, very angry at you? Oh, you're the best. Thanks so much. Congratulations, Tigers. We'll see you later.
Okay, good debate, guys. I'm gonna leave.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you for judging.
Yeah.
Yep, thanks for judging.
Long time no see, Akshana. See ya.
Hi, Sadie.